Imagine you've been packed into a train for days, and then you pull up and see a sign that just says Auschwitz. As Frankl writes, that one word stood for everything horrible you could possibly imagine. Gas chambers, crematoriums, massacres. That was the first shock, the moment the unbelievable became very, very real. Right when they got there, the prisoners faced what Frankl calls the finger game. An SS officer would just stand there and leisurely point left or right. It seemed so random, but it was the first life or death verdict. A point to the right meant you were headed to the work camps. A point to the left, which was the fate for about 90% of the people on that transport, meant you were headed to the gas chambers. Within hours. For those who survived that first selection, well, that's when they were systematically stripped of their identity. All of their possessions, any documents, gone. Their hair was shaved off, even their names were gone, replaced by a number tattooed right onto their skin. They were left with, as Frankl puts it, only their naked existence. For Frankl, this whole first phase came to a head in one single brutal moment. He was trying to save the manuscripts for his scientific book. I mean, this was his entire life's work. A veteran prisoner just looked at him, kind of laughed, and bellowed one word: shit. And right then, in that instant, Frankl understood. He had to let go of everything. He mentally just struck out his entire former life. And this, right here, is the central question of the entire book. After being stripped of everything that you think gives life value, your family, your job, your belongings, even your own name, how could anyone possibly find the will to keep going? This is the question Frankl's experience forced him and us to answer. Frankl's answer, the one that his time in Auschwitz just burned into his very being, is what he calls the will to meaning. He came to believe that the main driving force in all of us isn't the search for pleasure or even for power. It's this deep, profound, built-in search for meaning. He found this whole idea captured perfectly by the philosopher Nietzsche. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And in the camps, you have to understand, this wasn't some abstract philosophy. No, this was the raw, brutal difference between life and death. This very idea became the foundation of his own school of psychotherapy, which he named logotherapy. So, while Freud was all about the will to pleasure, or Adler focused on the will to power, Frankl argued that our deepest need is for a life filled with meaning and purpose. And Frankl saw this principle play out in the most brutal laboratory imaginable. He saw it with his own eyes. The prisoners who lost faith in the future, the ones who lost their why, were always the first to just deteriorate, both physically and mentally. He concluded they died less from a lack of food and more from a profound lack of hope. So, if meaning is so important, how do we find it, especially when we're suffering? Well, Frankl didn't just leave it as some big, abstract concept. He actually identified 3 very concrete paths that can lead us to discover meaning in our own lives. Okay, so the first path is through work, by creating something or accomplishing a task. The second is through love, by caring for another person or just experiencing the beauty of the world in nature or art. And the third, and this is the most profound one, is through the attitude we choose to take towards suffering that we simply cannot change. This gets to such a crucial point. Frankl argues that suffering, all by itself, is actually meaningless. It's a terrible, awful part of life, sure, but it has no built-in purpose. We are the ones who give it meaning. We do that by how we choose to face it, with courage, with dignity, with the love we bring to our darkest moments. And this all leads to what Frankl considered his most powerful and enduring insight, a discovery he made while he was being subjected to total domination. He called it the last of the human freedoms. Just think about it for a second. The Nazis could control his environment, his body, his possessions. They could take literally everything from him. But there was one thing they could never, ever take away: his freedom to choose his own attitude in any given situation. That inner choice, that was his and his alone. Frankl saw proof of this freedom everywhere, in the prisoners who would share their last tiny piece of bread, in those who offered a word of comfort when they had absolutely nothing else left to give. He argued that even a single example of someone maintaining their dignity in the face of absolute horror is all the proof we need that our inner strength can, in fact, raise us above our outward fate. What makes Frankl's philosophy so incredibly powerful is that he lived it himself, even before he was sent to the camps. He tells a story from just before the war that serves as the perfect parable for choosing meaning over everything else. So get this, shortly before the U.S. entered the war, Frankl, being a prominent doctor, was granted a visa to immigrate to America. This was a golden ticket, right? a chance to escape. But his elderly parents had no way of getting out. So he was completely torn. Should he go to America, where he could safely develop his brainchild, his life's work, logotherapy? Or should he stay and fulfill his duty as a son to protect his parents from their inevitable fate? He said he was desperately wishing for some kind of hint from heaven. And then he found it. He was at home, and on a table he saw a piece of marble. His father explained that he'd found it in the rubble of the great Viennese synagogue that the Nazis had just burned down. It was a fragment of the tablets of the Ten Commandments. So Frankl asked his father which commandment it was, and his father told him it was the one that begins, "Honor thy father and thy mother." For Frankl, this was it. This was his hint from heaven. The answer was suddenly crystal clear. He chose responsibility. He chose meaning over success and safety. He let the visa lapse and stayed with his parents, ready to share their fate. He chose his why, and that choice would ultimately help him bear the unimaginable how that was just around the corner. This brings us to his final piece of advice, and it's something that kind of turns our conventional thinking completely upside down. Frankl warns us not to aim for success, or even for happiness. He says they can't be pursued directly. They only happen as the unintended side effect of dedicating yourself to something much bigger than you are. And so we're left with the exact same question Frankl asked himself when he let that visa go. A question for each and every one of us to answer. In your own life, with your own unique freedoms and your own challenges, what cause is greater than yourself?